Okay. Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Basic Hebrew session on this 19th day of March 2023. Last week, we finished taking a look at Genesis chapter 11, and so this week I want to move into Psalm chapter 1. But before doing that, let's go ahead and take a look at Hebrew parallelism because Psalm 1, of course, being one of the poetic books, of course, would be written in Hebrew parallelism. What you will see here, this is a document, and what I did, the dean has written a book entitled The Poetry of God, and this takes excerpts out of that to kind of summarize what Hebrew parallelism is. Now, bearing in mind that this is basically a structure of writing, a way of expressing things, but this way of expressing things, it did not originate with man. It originated with God, and we know that because of the fact that it existed from the very beginning. We have instances of Hebrew parallelism in the very first chapter of Scripture, even in the second verse of all of Scripture as well, as we were showing the elementary Hebrew students on Friday evening. And so basically, what is Hebrew parallelism then? So Hebrew parallelism or Hebrew poetry is not like English poetry. We have a tendency to think of English poetry and it has that rhyme and that meter scheme, and you'll have that rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B, C, C for for a sonnet, for example. But that is not what this is. Rather, when we are dealing with Hebrew parallelism, it's poetry not in the sense that it rhymes or makes use of meter, but rather in the sense that you're going to have two lines or more, depending, that are going to say the same thing from two different perspectives. And so thus, we have then, rather, parallelism makes use of parallelism of thought. And so that's going to be the primary idea associated with Hebrew parallelism, in order to communicate a single truth that accurately represents the Creator. And that is another thing that sets the poetry, the parallelism that we see in Scripture, apart from all other poetry. This poetry accurately represents the Creator and says exactly that which the Creator intended for it to say. So in parallelism of thought, two or more lines express thoughts that are so closely intertwined that they clarify and expand on one another, and they must therefore be taken together in order to understand what the Creator was communicating. There is sometimes a temptation to take a single line of parallelism out of its context and to just say, well, this is what that line says. But the way that parallelism is written, one line expresses an idea that is so interrelated with the others that they cannot be separated from one another. And so if we do lift a line of parallelism out of context, we want to be very, very careful, because doing so may very often misses the modification that and the clarity that is expressed in the other lines. So these must therefore be taken together in order to understand what the Creator was communicating. There are four basic types of Hebrew parallelism. They are synonymous, contrasting, synthetic, and comparative. So, for example here, synonymous parallelism. This is where we're going to have two or more lines which use synonymous terms to express similar ideas and communicate a larger thought. An example of this occurs here in 1 Samuel 15:23a. And I did go ahead and do this, pulled these out for individuals who might not be familiar with Hebrew, which is why we only have the English here, but we can still see the structure even from the English. So 1 Samuel 15:23a. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as the sin of iniquity and idolatry. And you will notice that I do have those brackets around those terms that have been added. Now, actually, even if we were to look at the Hebrew text, we would see that those is verbs there are actually understood. But notice what we have here very clearly is and is. These would be referring to the same thing. And then we have this comparison here as the sin of and as the sin of. So those two are also going to be referring to the same thing. Now let's take a look at this idea of rebellion and stubbornness as well, and witchcraft and idolatry. So notice here the way that these two lines are set up. Rebellion is said to be the same thing as stubbornness. Now, what is it that we're dealing with when we start talking about rebellion? Well, rebellion is basically this idea of I know what the authority over me has said, but I'm not going to do what the authority wants me to do. I'm going to do what it is that I want to do. And stubbornness also is that same idea because what is stubbornness? There has been this design which has been expressed, and in essence, we've said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to yield and conform myself to that criterion. And so, thus, rebellion and stubbornness are the same thing. So, these terms here are synonymous, just as the being verbs were synonymous, just as this idea of the sin of would also be synonymous. And then we come on over here to witchcraft and iniquity and idolatry. And we know as well that witchcraft would be a violation of the Lord's design, just as iniquity and idolatry are as well. So these as well are synonymous terms also. And so what we have in that particular instance, okay, let me get my pen to cooperate here. So those are synonymous as well. And what this is, it's kind of an interesting thing. Very often we think of witchcraft as being, oh, this is a very, very bad sin. Well, what this is doing here is it's indicating that rebellion and witchcraft, both of those are violations of the Lord's design, and thus they are equal in that sense. Stubbornness, iniquity, and idolatry, we have a tendency to think, well, idolatry, that's a very bad sin as well. Well, consider what is happening when a person engages in either witchcraft or idolatry. In both of those instances, they are seeking an authority other than God's. So they are seeking to conform themselves to an authority other than God. Well, what do we do when we are rebellious or when we are stubborn? It's the same thing as well. We say, Lord, I know what it is that you've said, but no, I'm not going to do that. So we are thus seeking not God's authority, but we are seeking our own. And so that is how these two lines are related. So rebellion and stubbornness, this as well is seeking an authority other than God's. Now, coming on down, we also have this idea of contrasting parallelism. So up above, we had synonymous parallelism where we had two lines expressing the same thought. Well, now we're getting into this idea of contrasting parallelism, where we have two or more lines that are using contrasting terms to express similar ideas and communicate a larger thought. An example here being Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. So notice here, when we're dealing with this idea of with all thine heart and understanding, both of these are terms that are going to refer to the you that is in you, that is the inner man. So both of those referring to the inner man. And then we come on over here, trust, cause firmness to. So if we're causing firmness to something, then we're leaning upon that, we're standing upon that, versus lean not. So very clearly then, if we're not to lean on something, then we're not to cause firmness to, not to rely on that for support. So very clearly then, these two terms are going to be contrasting. And then as well, notice here the distinction in the Lord versus unto thine own. So once again, we've got contrasting. And then over here, we have synonymous, both of those referring to the you that is in you. One of the interesting things when we're dealing with synonymous and contrasting parallelism is that there's a certain mathematics that is involved. So if we assign a -1 to our contrasting terms and a +1 to our synonymous terms, and then we multiply it out, then it ends up coming to +1. And whenever we multiply out, it should come out to +1, and that lets us know that we've gotten the math right. And so that is one of those things that you will see here. So taken together, what this is saying is it's saying cause firmness to the Lord with your entire inner being, but don't cause firmness to your own thoughts, your own heart. Instead, cause firmness to the Lord. And taken together, then, that's what those are saying. So both of these are just different ways of expressing the same thought, but using contrasting ideas. Then we also have this here where we start talking about synthetic parallelism. Synthetic parallelism just means that one line is going to be building upon the other. So in synthetic parallelism, one line develops the thought expressed in the other in order to communicate a larger thought. So notice here in Proverbs 4:23, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. And in this instance, we have two lines. Our first line, keep thy heart with all diligence, and that is going to be our main clause. But then we come to the second, for out of it are the issues of life. And this is going to be the causal clause. In other words, it tells us why we should guard our heart with all diligence. Because what this is indicating, guard thy heart with all diligence, be especially careful to guard that heart, because out of the inner person, that's where all of life, all that a person is, comes out of. So, and then we have here as well comparative parallelism, where we're going to be comparing two things. And so in comparative parallelism, a known truth, especially one relating to the observable physical world, is compared to a lesser known truth, especially a spiritual one, in order to clarify and explain it. In other words, it's taking this idea of here's the physical, and this physical is kind of like the spiritual, and so the physical helps us to understand the spiritual side of things. An example here, Psalm 42, verse 1. As the hart panteth after the water brooks, so my soul panteth after thee, O God. And so notice what we have here. As the hart, as the deer, panteth after the water brooks. So there's our physical idea. So the heart needing that water for life, and so is thus desirous of the water brooks. And then, so my soul panteth after thee, O God. And there is the spiritual aspect. And so what we have here is this spiritual idea being compared to the physical in order to help us understand. So, in the same way, then, that the deer is desirous of that water from the water brooks for that refreshment and for that nourishment, so too our inner person should be desiring that relationship with God as well. So these are basically the four basic types of Hebrew parallelism: synonymous parallelism, contrasting parallelism, synthetic parallelism, and comparative parallelism. And you will be seeing all of these when we get into Psalm 1 here. And so coming on over then into Psalm 1. And so, very familiar passage here. So, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. And so, what we have here, and even in the English, you can begin to see some of these parallelisms come on out here. So notice here, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Well, you consider here as well, ungodly. Well, an ungodly person would be an individual who violates the design of God. Well, what would a sinner be? A sinner as well is an individual who violates the design of God. The scornful, individuals who say, I'm not going to follow that. Well, those as well would be individuals who violate the design of God. So all of these then are different ways of saying violators of the design of God. So those are going to be synonymous terms. And then in the council, well, the council, that's going to be that idea of this is what you should do, their criteria, if you will, which would also be their way, which is also going to be the place in which they are dwelling. So all of those as well are going to be synonymous. So basically, this is referencing their way of life. And then here you have walketh not, standeth not, sitteth not. And all of these are basically going to be those ideas of basic actions of life. So you can begin to see then all of these here are synonymous as well, just referencing basically the man who does not conduct his life in the same way that the violators of the design of God do is blessed. So you can begin to see these ideas of that synonymous parallelism begin to take part. And we'll see more of that as we go on down here into the Hebrew text. So beginning to look then at the Hebrew text, noticing here in verse 1. So we have Ashrei Ha'ish, Asher lo halak ba'atzath rishaim, Uvederek chataim lo amav, Uvemoshav letzim lo yashav. So that's verse 1 there. And notice what we have here, very first line there. So Ashrei. So Ashrei, as I take a look at this, one of the first things that I notice, and let me go ahead and change my color here to kind of demonstrate this a little bit more. So we have then here, that sere yod ending. And that sere yod ending is going to be indicative of masculine plural construct. And it's on the word asher, which is basically going to be that idea of blessedness. And so, but this is going to be in the plural construct. So thus we have blessednesses of. And then notice here as well, the next word, ha'ish. When I see a construct noun, I would anticipate that the absolute is going to follow it. And that is in fact what we have here. So ha'ish, I know that the word ish is going to be a noun. It is masculine, singular, and in this instance, it has the article, so it is absolute. So this article here, ordinarily hey with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte. But the aleph, being a guttural, it rejects the dagesh forte, and so the preceding vowel lengthens in this instance to the kamates. And so thus, ha'ish here then is definite, and remember that construct nouns are made definite or indefinite by their absolute. And the absolute noun is going to be definite if it has the article, if it is a proper noun, or if it is a pronoun. In this instance, our absolute has the article and is therefore definite, which in turn makes the construct noun definite as well. And that is why I went ahead and put the article in my translation of Ashereh there. So thus we have then the blessednesses of the man. And again, ish here, this is referencing man as an individual, so it can also take in a female individual as well. But so, as it does in this instance, not in every instance, but in this one. So we have then the blessednesses of the man. And, well, what type of a man are we talking about? Well, that is going to be introduced by this relative clause that we have following here. Notice the word asher, and asher is that relative pronoun. And you're also probably noticing as well that the relative pronoun and the word for blessedness come from the same root. Yes, they do, and they are in fact related in terms of meaning as well. Blessedness here in blessed in the sense of someone is being firm, that is their way is being established type idea. And so if then something is being firm, then you can take a step on it. And that's one of the things that relative pronouns do, is they have a tendency to introduce a next step that is further information about something. So there is a relationship and meaning between them, and that's why they do share that same root. But this word here, asher, this is going to be the relative pronoun, introducing a relative clause, which is giving us more information about this man here. And so what we see then, as we go down a little bit further, what is the nature of this particular man? Well, notice here we have lo. Well, lo is going to be the negative adverb. And so negative adverb meaning that idea of not. And then I have halak. Well, this here is a verb form, and it has that basic pointing. And we have seen previously where that basic pointing is indicative of a cow perfect third masculine singular verb. So that's what this is. This is going to be a cow that is basic action, perfect, completed action, third masculine singular. So where the subject is third masculine singular on the verb halak, meaning to walk. And so thus not he walked. We'll explain about that perfect aspect here in just a moment, why it's saying that he walked not. And then we have next ba'atzah. Right away, you can see that we do have the Beth preposition on this word. So remember, most Hebrew words are built off of 3 letters. You can see here that we have a total of 4, the Beth, the ayin, the tzadeh, and the tau. That tells me that something has been added, usually either to the end or to the beginning. And in this instance, it is the Beth that has been added. Now, I look at the way that the Baith preposition has been pointed, and I know that normally the Baith preposition would be pointed with a simple vocal schwa, but in this particular instance, it is pointed with a pathak. Now, that would generally suggest to me that we have an article added, but that is not what has happened in this instance. How do I know that? Because if I had the article, the normal pointing of the article is hey with the pathak followed by a dogesh forte, in which instance the dogesh forte would have gone inside of the following letter, but the following letter is a guttural which rejects the dogesh forte, and so I would have expected the preceding vowel to lengthen to a comates, but that's not what we have here. So something else is going on. Notice how the ayin is pointed. So the ayin is pointed with a hatef pathak, a composite schwa for a guttural. So basically, composite schwa on a guttural means it's going to be vocal. In Hebrew, we cannot have two vocal schwas standing side by side. So thus, if then the Baith were pointed with a vocal schwa, and the ayin is pointed with a vocal schwa, then I therefore have two vocal schwas standing side by side, which, as we've said, is an impossibility. So what happens then is the first one is going to lengthen to the nearest short vowel in pronunciation. And the nearest short vowel in pronunciation to a hatef pathak is a pathak, and that is why we have that pathak underneath the Baith. So that's not going to be the pathak of the article. Rather, that is just a normal effect of having two vocal schwas side by side. So thus I have the Baith preposition there on the word atzath. And this here with that ath ending lets me know that this is going to be a noun, and it is going to be feminine singular, and it is going to be construct. Another thing that lets me know that that pathak underneath the Baith is not the article, because construct nouns never take the article. And this word here has the idea of counsel. So thus I would translate this in counsel of, and then next we have the word rishaim. Well, as I take a look at this, I notice the triliteral root rasha, or which is going to be the idea of wicked, and then that im ending, which lets me know that it is plural. So this then is going to be an adjective substantively used here. Masculine plural, and then the im ending also lets me know that it is absolute. And so thus I would translate this as wicked ones. There's no noun for this adjective to modify, which means it itself is the noun. It's used substantively here. And then we come on down a little bit further, and now I have uviderik chataim lo amav. Well, already I'm beginning to see a little bit of similarities beginning to emerge here. Up here in this first line, I had lo halak. Down here in the second line, I have lo amav. So that tells me I have two verb forms right there. And then also notice the similarity here. Uviderek chataim ba'atzath rishaim. I hear that repetition of the Baith preposition. I hear that repetition of the im ending. That lets me know that I've got some terms here that are going to be correlated well with one another. So taking this apart then, uviderek chataim lo amav. So notice here, I can see the triliteral root derek. I can also see the Baith preposition, and I can also see the conjunction, the form that the conjunction takes when it is attached to a word beginning with a vocal schwa. And so thus we have the conjunction and the Baith preposition in, and then derek in the construct here, way of. I know it's in construct because, again, of the fact that we do have that similarity in structure. So if up here the noun was construct, this down here should also be construct. And that means then that the noun or that ends in that im is in fact going to be the absolute, and that's what we have here. So hataim, and you'll notice again that im ending indicating that it is masculine plural absolute on that word hata, having the idea of to violate. And so thus these are violators. So, and in way of violators, lo, not, amav, well, this right here is that same pointing that we had in the first line with halak, but the pathak has lengthened underneath the influence of the athnok here, that accent which has a tendency to indicate the logical middle of the verse and thus puts the word that it is in pause. And so thus this is basically just another verb. So this is cal, perfect, third masculine singular of the verb amad, which has the idea of to stand. So not he stood. And then we come on down a little bit further here to uvemoshav letzim lo yashav. And again, you can begin to see the parallelism in form come up, because notice here as well, I've got another bait preposition with another im, and then I've got another verb, lo yashav, which correlates with lo amav, which correlates with lo halak. So these forms are all correlating with one another. Now, just taking this apart then. So uvemoshav, you can see once again, I've got that conjunction, the same form that we had up above, that it takes when it precedes a word beginning with that vocal schwa. Then you can see the beth preposition, and then this word here, moshav, which comes from it's related to the verb that you see here, yashav, but they've taken a mem, put it on the front of it to turn that verb idea into a noun. And so thus, yashav has the idea of to sit, to dwell. Moshav then is the place where one sits, thus a seat. And it's followed by another substantive here, so it is therefore going to be in the construct. So we have then and in seat of, leitzim, and again, you can see that im ending indicating masculine plural absolute, and this is the idea of scorning ones, scorners. Lo, not, yashav, he sat. Again, this one here would be that normal pointing for a cal, perfect, third masculine singular. But again, it's the last word of the verse. And so as indicated by that saluk, and so thus it is in pause there, hence the vowel lengthening. But basically, he sat. So thus you can see the correlations then in all of these terms, where, as we have seen, let me just go ahead and clean that up a little bit. And so notice here, you have lo halak, verb form, in the cal perfect third masculine singular. Lo amav, also another verb form, cal perfect third masculine singular. And then here as well, lo yashav, another verb form. So all those verb forms related to one another. And then we have here as well these locations as indicated by the beth prepositions. And so all those forms are then also going to be related as well. And as we've seen as well, walked not, stood not, sat not, all of those are going to be basic indicators of basic actions of life. So this is an individual then, this man who is blessed. He does not walk, he does not sit, he does not stand in the way of violators, but all of this also, those three basic actions would also take in other basic actions of life as well. For instance, eating, hawking, driving, or whatever other mode of transportation as well. Um, Amusement, etc. All of those would be involved. In other words, his way of living is not in the council of wicked ones. It's not in the way of violators. It's not in the seat of scorner. And so this is an individual, then he does not place himself, his way of life is not characterized by violations of the design of God. Now, I also made mention of the fact that I was going to talk a little bit about this idea of the perfect aspect. We think of that as being perfect aspect, completed action. And so thus we would say, oh, does that mean that this is an individual who has never walked, never stood, never sat? No, that's not what this is saying. What this is saying, however, and let me go ahead and switch to another color here. What this is saying is that he was going through life, but then there came a point in time where he was reconciled to the Lord. He caused firmness to the Lord. And as a result, then his way of life stopped being characterized by the way of violation. So thus he stopped walking, he stopped standing, and he stopped sitting, etc. All right. Anything else that we should bring out there, sir?
No, I think that's good. I'm trying to finish up modifying the document.
All right.
So,
do you need me to go a little bit further?
You know, the connection between verse 1 and verse 2 really is almost an inseparable.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be bad to bring up a little more of verse 2. It's
Sure.
Shall we say, rather important.
Absolutely.
So, okay, go ahead.
I can do that. So when we come into verse 2, and the way that the English reads here, so blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. And the English presents this as a contrast. He does not do this, but rather he does this. The Hebrew is a little bit different. It does not say, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. Rather, verse 2 is introduced by this he here. And he is going to be introducing a subordinate causal conjunction. In other words, what we have is not a contrast, but rather what this is indicating why this man is not doing this, and thus why he is blessed as well. So he is not conducting his way of life in a way that is characteristic of violators of the design of God, because the condition exists. That's what that M there is. That M is going to be a conditional conjunction. We would say if, but basically because the condition exists, well, what is the condition that exists? Bitorath yihye chetzo. Uvitoratho yege yomam walayla. So because the condition exists, mitorath, notice again, you can see the beth preposition here on the construct form of the word Torah, that is law. So in law of, well, in whose law? Yihya, and that's what follows. And again, that's going to be the absolute. As a proper name, it is definite, in turn making law definite as well. So in the law of Yihya, Chetzo, And this word is the word kafats with the o, third masculine singular pronominal suffix. So the delight of him, and there would be an understood verb of existence there. So because the condition exists that the delight of him exists in the law of Yihya. So he is not doing these things because of the fact that his delight is in the law of the Lord, in his criteria, in that relationship with the Lord. And then notice here, we come on down a little bit further. Uvitoratho, again, notice you have that conjunction on the front of it, the form that it takes before a vocal schwa. Then you have the Baith preposition, the construct form of Torah as well with a third masculine singular pronominal suffix. And in the law of him, very clearly that would then correlate with in the law of Yihya. And then you have Yege. Notice here you have that yod there, and that is going to be one of our imperfect performatives. Remember that the imperfect performatives are aleph, yod, tau, and nun. Aleph being first common singular, the yod being third masculine singular or plural, the tau being second masculine singular and plural, second feminine singular and plural, and third feminine singular and plural, and then the nun being first common plural. So the yod here would be third masculine. I looked to the end to see if there's a U class of vowel. There isn't, so I know this is going to be third masculine singular. So third masculine singular here. And then on the verb haga, which is the idea of to meditate. And so thus he is meditating. Yomam, well, you can see the word yom there, and this is kind of an adverbial form of it. So daily, walayla, and you can see again the conjunction there on the word laila, night and night. So, and in the law of Yihya, so that would be those two ideas there. In the law of Yihya and in the law of him. So those two terms are going to be synonymous with one another. And then as well, you have the delight of him, and he is meditating. So he is thinking about these things. And so he's thinking, his thoughts are in the law of the Lord, and our thoughts are going to be in those areas that are a delight to us. So in other words, the reason that his life is not characterized by the manner of living of violators of the design of God is because he delights and is thinking about the law of the Lord. And notice the temporal idea here. Yomam Walayla. Day and night. In other words, this is going to be a continuous idea, just as it is picked up there as being continuous there with that imperfect as well. So this is something that does not stop. His delight, his meditation in the law of the Lord is consistent. And so because of those things, then his life is characterized as an individual who conforms to the design of God, and thus he experiences the blessing of the Lord in his life because he has stopped walking in the way of violation.
Okay.